All right, here we go, you happily miserable, curiously loyal, accursed. I'm David Herle, here, as I always am, with our political panel, Jordan Leichnitz, Scott Reid, and Kory Teneycke. Here's what you can expect over the next hour. We're going to be talking Poilievre comms, writ large as a strategy, and specifically the thinking behind his safe drug video. Was it a mistake? Not a mistake? We'll talk. Our cursed clipping is Chantal Hebert's piece in The Star on why Trudeau and the Libs are likely to survive the Emergencies Act inquiry. We'll recap everything that mattered during the last week there, and then a dive into the politics of inflation relief spending, what the provinces are doing with surpluses and deficits, and how that ties into their ask of the feds for healthcare. After that, it's the delightful Mr. Gordon Pinsent and our Hey Yous for the week. Jordan, Scott, Kory, how was your weekend?
Well, mine was pretty good.
Really? Why?
I got engaged this weekend.
Get the hell out.
I did. Yeah, no, it's shocking that one real live woman never wanted to marry me once, but two, this is,
what the hell is wrong with you?
What's wrong with the female population?
You got paroled, and now you said, no, send me back. I like the meals.
1 for 2.
The structure was pleasing. What's wrong with you?
Two lines, freedom, crucifixion. Yeah, I'm freedom. All right, go ahead. No, I'm just kidding, crucifixion.
Yeah, no, it's all very exciting. It's all very exciting.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
How did it happen? Give us a little detail.
Walk us through the moments.
It wasn't like a big surprise thing. Just here at home. So anyway, it was. I'm not going to win any great awards for romance, I think, on the whole thing, but still very happy, just the same.
Was she surprised by the ring, or did she help pick out the ring?
She helped pick it out, so that usually decreases.
That does break the surprise element.
Yeah,
that
Dude,
does.
You're upping your chances of success, though. That's
You're trading surprise for certainty, I guess, in terms of what the reaction will be. But no, it's great. Very happy.
Just one of 1,000 compromises you're about to make, but that's fine. Enjoy yourself.
Once you actually take your potential spouse shopping for the ring, how long do you have before you propose before it gets awkward?
Well, you gotta wait till the ring is done. There's a whole process on these things getting made and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's all good.
Don't get married.
Jordan, I presume
Julie, wait for me.
Presumably you don't have anything to compete with that in your weekend.
No, I don't. But Kory was making me think about when my partner proposed to me, and he did it in the Library of Parliament, and it was around this time of year, many years ago. But
that's a romantic
good memory.
place.
Yeah, it was great.
I think it was 1989 when I got down on bended knee and I said to you, David, shall we spend our lives together, losing, maybe occasionally winning, but mostly losing election campaigns? Will you stand with me through thick and thin? Will you take this glass of rum as my betrothal here? I don't know, man. Getting married a second time, you got to have rocks in your head, you silver-haired bastard.
I think it's actually even more romantic because he knows what he's in for, right?
Well, it's my starter marriage is behind me, so away we go.
Oh man, you're asking for a horse's head in the mail.
Yeah, probably.
All right. Speaking of horses' heads and all these types of dark things, let's talk about Poilievre. So we've talked in the past about his media strategy, very little engagement with the Ottawa Press Gallery, seemingly a number of local, ethnic, or congenial media source interviews alongside the continuing long-form videos that he puts out. We've talked about whether he needs the Ottawa media or not in this group, and the consensus has been not much. I want to keep exploring that today, though, because Poilievre put out a video on policy toward people with drug addictions. I don't want to get into the policy because I have no expertise in the area. However, it seemed to be, to me, the consensus of seemingly all experts and all media commentary that his video was both wrong in the facts that it cited and wrong in the conclusions about policy that it reached. So I have two questions, Scott. First is, does that matter? And the second thing is, they would have known when they made it what reaction the video would get. So why did they do it?
I think they knew some things. I think they might have learned a couple things, or maybe not, but I think that they may not have seen a couple things coming, and they may not be concerned about those things. I think it was a mistake from a communication standpoint. But set aside the policy arguments, as you say. Let's try to be content free, and let's try to be moralistically unjudgmental, right? But I think it was the first miscalculation I think he's made since he's been leader in terms of comm strategy and comms tactics. And I say that because I think, it's okay to have an uncomplicated and unsophisticated message that, relies on clarity. It's not okay, I don't think, to be uncomplicated and unsophisticated on topics that are complicated and sophisticated, because the clarity that you're looking for, the simplicity you're looking for can boomerang on you. The connection you're looking to make with the audience can boomerang on you. If people think, hang on, by virtue of how simplistic you're being in the treatment of this issue, you're actually patronizing me. You're saying, okay, yeah, it's just this easy. And people know it isn't that easy. They know it's not that uncomplicated. And so they go, well, you're bullshitting me then. And it backfires. I think there's a specific thing that they kind of missed in this kind of everybody's just like me. And there's a lot of that around him. And I think there's a trap in that, because sometimes you are mistaken that everybody's just like you. And I think one of the things that's happened in the last 15 years, this feels like a video from 2000, but in the last 15 years, drugs aren't just like, so-called junkies like on the streets, and not that we should be indifferent to their plight, but you're talking about an opioid crisis, which has dug its way into every demographic. Like there's a guy at our hunting camp who got addicted to pills and his life went completely in the ditch. This is a good old boy, had back surgery and it went on, and that experience is very widely held. So I think a lot of people, they're making an assumption that people just nod their heads and go, yeah, I'm not listening to them fucking experts, just like knock it off with all this bullshit injection site and baby and all these people, like enough is enough. And I don't think that that's been the lived experience for much of North America over the course of the past 15 years with opioids. And I think that they therefore fell into a trap, and they won't withdraw it. They will never apologize. They won't take a step back. I'm not suggesting they should apologize, but if their opponents, and I think that this is an opportunity that should be greater exploited by their opponents, if they push them, they'll dig in harder. They'll say, fuck you, you don't get it, you think you know so much, actually piss on the experts, piss on everybody else. They should be getting Poilievre on the record saying that. They should be pushing him hard and getting him to defend this. So I think it was a mistake from a communication standpoint. I think it was almost a little slice of arrogance, which is their favorite thing they like to throw at other people. There's a bit of hubris in this.
Do they know something we don't know, Jordan, or that I don't know, Jordan? Because, I'd like you to answer the question I put to Scott, too, which is, will this hurt them, and why do you think they purposely went out and did this video? But my family has history with alcohol, but we don't have any experience with opioid substance abuse. And so just as a layperson, I have to say that I have to rationally defer to the experts on something like safe injection sites. I don't intuitively understand why you don't want to stop the people from being addicted, why you want to facilitate their addiction. So I read it, and people who are smart say this is what works and the other stuff doesn't work. So I accept that. But I'm not certain that that's a general application.
Yeah, so I think to your first question, to me this felt a little bit like a trial balloon. He was out in BC. They needed to kind of theme that a little bit, and so I think that they were testing this out. I think that they think that this is mobilizing for their folks there. I think it's a mistake. I think what really struck me about it is that it, for the very first time, really pulled him off the cost of living stuff that had been working so well for him. And I think it pulled him off in a way that, similar to Scott, it really struck me as dated.
You can't stop progress. We hear that old saw, bent out of shape and generalized upon all too frequently. But having professional experience with this sort of thing, I'm telling you that progress can be delayed, unnecessarily, often to our detriment. I've been talking for a few weeks now on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS, about how it's going to be impossible to meet our climate goals, getting to net zero by 2050, unless we start thinking about digital policy as a huge contributive piece to our climate action plan. Put more pithily, that digital policy is climate policy. TELUS believes that until we come to grips with that mode of thinking and what digital tools can do in the fight against climate change, we are putting in jeopardy the progress we need to make in that fight. The progress Canada signed on the bottom line for. I've mentioned here how universal high-speed connectivity and 5G technologies will cut our greenhouse gas emissions by up to 20%, 40 to 60% of our Paris commitments. We know it because we're all living it, doing more working, learning, meeting, reading, shopping, taking medical appointments, and so on, online. But here's another less obvious sustainability benefit that comes from 5G innovation. There will be an immediate improvement in how we dispose of garbage, Herle writes. Our waste management practices. 5G-enabled smart labeling and packaging is going to seriously upgrade how we sort and divert our recyclables away from landfills. On top of that, it'll help reduce food waste, moving what does get spoiled away from landfills to alternative destinations like energy recovery. Those are just a couple of examples from the very usable climate-protecting future. But it depends on getting the foundational digital planning and policy implementation right now, so that ultimately we can reach our climate targets. To learn more about this kind of thinking and to support it, go to telus.com/digital policy for climate.
Look, I don't think that it's a mystery what's happening. And I think, I'll raise an example of, I think, the mirror of this on the Liberal side that happened in the past week too on gun control, which is, I think, a similarly emotive issue for a bunch of voters on the other side. And it's a way to take a kind of a value shot that is simplistic in some respects. So, the Liberal version of this past week was their go-to around banning more firearms, and as if that there's any expert out there who thinks that that's going to stop, gang shootings in urban areas. Like it's a cheap value shot that tries to frame a debate in a way that is, perhaps overly simplistic. Well, not perhaps, it is. And I think the drug issue has often been used by conservative politicians in a similar manner. And so I think there's some parallels in what happened this week on those two things. I think there's some things that Pierre got right in that video that are intuitively correct to a lot of people. And I know we don't want to have a policy debate around this right now, David, but I think there is a common sense application that one of the cities with the worst outcomes in terms of homelessness and serious drug addiction and overdoses is Vancouver. And it's the market that has really been the test program for a lot of these approaches, which, I think, there's some evidence that some of that stuff works, and there's some evidence that some of that doesn't work, because you can find other jurisdictions that have taken different approaches and yielded better results in terms of, safe supply. But let's just take Kory. But not the whole picture. And I think part of what he's saying is part of the picture that people feel the approach that that the experts like on this leaves people feeling a little bit empty in the same way it does you. There's something that I think is intuitively appealing to a chunk of the population that. Just giving people more drugs doesn't help reduce drug addiction, in the same way that there's an intuitive appeal to let's just, wave our hand and ban all firearms and firearm crime will go away, right? But this simple oversimplification, a sort of approach to some of these very complicated issues does have an appeal, and all parties do it in one way or another. And, I don't know. I don't think it's public policy at its best, but I don't think from a political tactic standpoint, it's that difficult to understand where it's coming from, and all parties do it.
First of all, I should interject and say we've lost Jordan's connection. I hope she's able to get back to us soon. But in the meantime, I just want to stick with you, Kory and Scott. Then I'm going to want you to jump in here. Does it matter? Does it matter I'm not talking about the policy here, but does it matter that everybody who commented on this, including, and he got a lot of publicity, Ben Parent, but does it matter that everybody who commented on this said that the fact base was wrong in the video? So does earned media still matter in that regard, in that everybody who was writing about this in a newspaper, everybody that was commenting on this was saying, actually, what he's saying about Alberta is not correct?
Well, if you say everybody, you're meaning like Twitter, right? And which is probably, curated by your Twitter algorithm and the people you follow, et cetera, et cetera. Like it, I think the appeal for a lot of these policies, and in this
Paul Wells stripped him naked.
Yeah, well, but Paul Wells is as normal a person as the people on this podcast.
That's what I'm asking.
Hey, fuck right off.
It does, because the audience is a lot broader. Part of the problem with the social media stuff, engaging reaction on things like this, using that as the metric, as opposed to what we normally like to use as professionals here, which is polling. I don't think that, if you were to poll his response, that video with the general public, it's going to be the dog pile that it was on Twitter. I just don't 100%. Think it is. Right. And so, right. Saying that the reaction is all one dimensional in one direction here, I think would be not borne out by that research.
Right.
I'm confused by what you're saying, to be honest, Kory. Like the heavy use of the gun control comparison left me believing that you were saying this was a mistake. This is on values driven, looking in the mirror, only thinking about your own voters' mistake. But then you keep defending it. So I'm a little confused by what your position is. But let me just finish. The other thing I would say in terms of does it matter? It matters less than his critics think, but it matters far more than his own team thinks. And I think that's really interesting. What matters about this video to me, it's been the first indication that they've been self-indulgent rather than self-disciplined, I think, since his leadership started. I think it's an example of letting themselves get taken off message, like Jordan mentioned. They're not talking about cost of living. They are playing to the bleachers. And I think that they open themselves up to vulnerability. And that's why I think, his opponent should be exploiting it more, forcing him to talk more about it, defend it, dig in. And I'm hoping that it means, frankly, as somebody that opposes his march to the prime minister's office, I hope that it means that he's willing to make 2 or 3 more of these mistakes in the future, because I do think that he has blind spots. We all have blind spots in politics. We all sometimes believe our own bullshit. What we and our friends think, it must be what everyone thinks. I think this video is a good example of that. So I hope that there's more in that pack that he shares with us.
Well, I'm not sure either one is a mistake, though, for if you're looking at who your voter, base is. Like, I don't think, I think it's bad policy in terms of the gun control stuff, but I don't think it's hurting Trudeau. I think they're doing it because the people who intuitively agree with that, even though, I'm clearly not one of them, aren't offended. Like they tend to agree. Not everyone, but, there's more sophisticated thinkers who will say, no, that's it's more complicated than that. But there are a whole lot of people who think about issues a lot more casually. And what seems intuitively true is the statement that you made earlier, David, which is that giving people more drugs isn't going to solve this problem, and that approach is not working. And Exhibit A is downtown Vancouver. You're seeing that play out in the United States right now too. Like, there's a reason why places like San Francisco have been electing Republican municipal officials for the first time in their history, and it's around these issues, right? So obviously, there's a sense that what's being sold here by the expert class is not bearing out in the kinds of tangible results that you would expect to see if this was such a universally fucking brilliant policy. And so, I don't think it's a mistake, but I'm not going to cast a big value judgment on either one of these things if we're just looking at it through a political tactics lens. I think it's a pretty clear play.
Yeah, I don't
Jordan, last thought. Thanks for coming back, by the way. Sorry we lost you. Yeah,
just wandered off for a little bit there. I don't really buy what Kory's selling there. And the reason for that is that I think that if this were an issue that played the way that this video suggests Poilievre and his team think it does, then you wouldn't have had Stephen Harper, who had to go back on his position on safe injection sites, as far back as 2015. You wouldn't have had the BC NDP elected to a stronger majority with a really clear position on safe supply and drug decriminalization. I think the public has moved on this topic in a really, really huge way in the last 10 years. And I think that this video really just smacks of looking only at your own people. And I do think that break with their disciplined focus on cost of living is a mistake, I think, and possibly a big one.
All right, so here's a Curse of Politics shout out to all the pollsters out there. Give us some data on safe injection sites. Let's see what people think about how to handle the drug crisis, because we're all mewling about it here and we really don't know. So first, I want to note that the sun has again been shining on the West Coast, and that our sponsor CN has been moving grain from the prairies to market at a hell of a clip. The week ending November 20th, in fact, was the railway's second best week ever for grain, 795,000 tons. For the moment, at least, all the cogs in the grain supply chain, and you will forgive my mixed metaphor, are humming along in harmony and precision. But I also want to look east for a moment, to Thunder Bay, up on the northwestern shore of the lakehead. Thunder Bay is to the Great Lakes what Vancouver and Los Angeles are to the Pacific, a crucial gateway. This is inside railroad, so to speak, but CN has been urging shippers for some time now to consider eastern ports as a hedge against the overburdened Port of Vancouver, which these days suffers some periodically extreme weather. Atmospheric rivers are savage disruptors. Anyway, as CBC noted on its news website last week, Thunder Bay saw more than 1 million tons of Canadian potash move through its terminal this past summer. That's more than double the volume of a year earlier. Potash is not as legendary a Canadian crop as grain, but it is ever important. The agriculture industry worldwide uses it as fertilizer. Millions of farmers everywhere depend on it. And Saskatchewan has the largest known potash reserves on Earth. The other big producers are Russia and Russia's close ally Belarus. And right now and for the foreseeable future, sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine are severely restricting those two countries from selling much potash. So the burden of supplying the world falls to Canadian producers, and those producers have chosen to ship their potash through Thunder Bay. Why? Because Thunder Bay is the only port on the St. Lawrence Seaway that has the facilities to handle potash, and because Vancouver, which can also handle it, is congested. It's pretty much that simple and makes perfect sense. For CN, this is the world aligning as it should. Sensible shipping decisions, methodical forecasting and planning, cooperation along the length of the supply chain, and the railway's push to ensure cargo leaves and arrives on time all add up to record performances. Cargo has to move, and boy has potash moved. All right, let's move on to our clipping of the day from Chantal Hébert in the Toronto Star. My God, a lot of our clippings over the years have been from Chantal Hébert. It's pretty good, I guess. So, Scott, I had to read the beginning of this column, not necessarily because it's so relevant to the point, but just because I had to. Just because I have to read it. And it goes like this. A decade and a half ago, the publication of the findings of the inquiry into what was known as the federal sponsorship scandal signaled the beginning of the end of a dozen-year Liberal tenure. Do you remember that, Scott?
I do. It's the fucking that never stops fucking you. Yes, I do. Yes.
Justice John Gomery's final report.
Thank you so much for the sponsorship scandal.
And the blame it apportioned to Jean Chrétien's government led to the defeat of his successors. What was his name?
I think it was Martin. I don't know. I only speak in French when I think historically. So
led to the defeat of his successor's minority government and set the stage for a conservative decade in power. Do you remember that, Kory?
Yeah. I recall.
Yeah, okay. But the political parallels between that exercise and the ongoing inquiry into Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's decision to use the Emergencies Act to deal with the blockades and anti-vax convoy, and stop there. Should Justice Paul Rollo conclude in his final report that Trudeau failed to meet the legal threshold required to invoke the Emergencies Act, the Prime Minister's minority government is unlikely to take a decisive hit over the issue. For all intents and purposes, the case, it seems, is already closed in the minds of many Canadians, and the popular verdict, notwithstanding Rollo's future considerations, favors the ruling Liberals. Kory, Is Chantal correct that the government has suffered no political damage?
Yeah, she's correct. But there are really clear differences between those two situations, which I'm sure you guys would agree with. Like the Emergencies Act inquiry is about a policy decision to invoke the Emergencies Act, which is complicated and controversial, and people are going to have different views of that, et cetera, et cetera. But that's very different than a corruption scandal involving your own government, right? Like these are very, very different kettles of fish that we're trying to compare here, and so the implications for the government are very different in both of them. Like, there are a lot more people who agree with imposition, according to the latest polling, of the Emergencies Act than support the general direction of the government. Like it's about the same, right? Like
there's definitely more people that support the invocation of the Emergencies Act than supported the sponsorship scandal.
Yeah, well, like
there's more popular support, right? I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I'm not comparing between.
Is that true about Quebec? Is that true though? Have they polled Quebec advertising agencies? Because I think they find that crosstab might be different.
Well, it's certainly a lot more support in Chuck Guittet's household than. But look, what's the latest right track, wrong direction? It's like 60-40, wrong direction right now is where the public is. And it's about 2/3, so more than that support the invocation of the Emergencies Act. So this is about a policy decision in which a supermajority of Canadians are in agreement with the government's position, basically. So is that going to hurt the government? Nah, I don't see how it could. Like that decision in isolation is like twice as popular as the government is as a whole. So there's no price to be paid here.
It's a great way of analyzing it, Kory. It's a great way of analyzing it. Scott, what did we learn? We set this up last week, and you had a series of tests for the people that were appearing and some advice for how they ought to prepare. What did we learn from the cavalcade of ministers, senior staff, and the PM this week?
I think that we learned that they were well prepared. I think we learned something that we have known. I think you guys will agree with this, that we have known before. We sometimes forget in the day in, day out grind of the government. And that is that when they're really put to the test in moments of test, the operation comes together and tends to perform strongly. So when you've got a blackface challenge, the team hunkers down and pulls it out, and the prime minister throws the thing on his back. When you've got a can't blink eyeball to eyeball moment with the Trump White House on renegotiating NAFTA, the team hunkers down and they pull it out. And I think preparing for this week, all those ministers, like so much potential jeopardy, so much peril. Somebody could, hours of being examined, could have been a huge screw up by anybody at any moment that could have cost you. So it's I think.
Scott, can I just throw in, by the way, remarkable disclosure of conversations and correspondence. And at some point, I would love to have a conversation amongst us about what ought to be accessible and what ought not to be accessible. Because now it seems that conversations are accessible. And holy lifting. I mean, God, if those texts and emails had come out in my time in the fucking Montgomery inquiry, Jesus, mother.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. I wouldn't have been put in prison. I would have just been taken out to the roadside, and they would have put there would have been bang bang, and I'd be
stuff
gone.
that you and I were saying to each other. I mean, that can't be. I mean,
No, and you saw Lametti, on the stand there, sort of having to explain and make distinctions, saying, well, when I talk to my Ontario counterpart, I'm speaking with a professionalism in my voice that's distinct from when I'm shooting the shit with my friend and cabinet colleague, Marco Mendicino. Like, it's going to be qualitatively different. And that's true, But look, overall, I'm in violent agreement. Overall, I think that this week did not harm the government. It doesn't have a lasting bruise on them. I think even if Rollo decides that the statutory trigger was was not appropriate. I don't even think that's going to have any kind of lasting negative effect. People will say, well, maybe we need to look at the legislation, make some adjustments. I don't think it'll have a political fallout. The whole risk of political fallout was that if somebody made a misstep. So it wasn't about winning. It was about making sure you didn't lose. It was making sure about you didn't fuck up. And I thought that Trudeau fabulously did not fuck up. Senior staff who testified ahead of him fabulously did not fuck up. All the ministers didn't fuck up. But in addition to that, they each kind of laid out a rational, reasonable set of arguments. They may not be ones that opponents agree with. They may not be ones that lawyers think necessarily meet the test. I'm not sure. I literally am not sure. I lack that expertise. But they made a rational argument day by day. You know, Marco Mendocino said, here's the security risk that I saw. David Lemeni actually talked about moving out of his apartment, channeling the personal risk that a lot of people in Ottawa felt who lived in downtown, like you, Jordan. And then, you heard, just a whole variety of risks being articulated. Chrystia Freeland talking about the economic threat. And, you hear people going, oh, the economic threat isn't contemplated in the act.
Yeah, but the Prime Minister was the most persuasive, wasn't he? I know that you're building up to him, but I actually think he might have scooped a win out of it, Scott. I read fucking Andrew Coyne after it, and I said, Christ, he's convinced Coyne.
Yeah.
He's convinced Coyne with his testimony that whether or not it is technically within the reach of this legislation, it was reasonable to think it was.
Yeah, it was a strong performance. The only thing I would say, just going from our clipping from Chantal, I just want to make this last thing before I hand over to Jordan. I hate that we have to somehow go back to Gomery in order to analyze this. I know there are 2 points of reference of a judicial inquiry, but Jesus, someday a nighttime pod with ample booze and weed, we will be dedicating to the subject of Gomery. I'm not emotionally ready to talk about it even yet, but we will at some point explore it. But there's 1,000 reasons that those things are distinct and different. Starting with Chrystia Freeland wasn't fucking charged by Zaccardelli with, breaking and entering. That's a big distinction maybe in terms of how it affected the flow of future events. But I thought the government came out looking really strong, really solid.
There's a big difference between the two things. And one of the big differences is that one of the reasons why Trudeau was so effective on Friday is it turns out that it really helps to have made the right decision. Like when you're doing comms, if you're communicating around a good thing you've done, it's really a lot easier than communicating around a bad thing you've done. Jordan, the first thing before you jump in, I just want to say, would you please get rid of either your Bell or Rogers Wi-Fi service and switch to TELUS so we don't have these interruptions. Now,
maybe if TELUS will sponsor Scott's therapy so that we can do this evening pod.
Look, they don't have that much money. I don't think
that's more of a Bell thing anyway. Let's talk. Let's talk, Scott. Let's talk.
Let's not. I'm more in the let's not fucking talk camp. Hashtag.
Jordan, what do you think of the week at the public?
Yeah, I don't think any surprises. I think the PM did what he needed to do. He did it well. I think that they avoided all of the main traps there. I think that also one of the maybe more esoteric traps that was out there would have been for the Liberals to in any way kind of latch on to the culture war piece around this and dig deeper in that divide. And they absolutely resisted the urge, which is good and disciplined and I think ultimately quite good for the country. I also agree it's not going to matter whether or not they met the legal test. I think the public has passed judgment already. And the fact that after the act was enacted that they stopped using it as quickly as they could is very helpful to that case. What really struck me though, overall, not just last week, but sort of through the course of it was how many aspects of this whole debacle came down to small errors, small hiccups in the machinery. So ministers not communicating clearly with provincial counterparts or in a timely way. Lucky not speaking up at this cabinet meeting. A lot of this shit really could have been avoided or could have been toned down more quickly if those problems in the machine had been addressed. So I hope that that's a takeaway for them. You didn't have to, some of these aspects probably didn't have to get to quite a crisis point that they did. And I think that's an interesting takeaway. And I also thought, like, you know, the nuance that was revealed within the Conservative benches was interesting. You know, Candice Bergen talking to the Prime Minister and being like largely supportive, even after O'Toole was ousted. Like this was an interesting piece for me. And lastly, you know, I think I don't think anyone in Ottawa is going to text quite the same way ever again. So, do
you think? Follow up on that. How do you think that might change behavior?
Well, I mean, it had me thinking about, you know, the time when everybody used to have BlackBerry pins, and then there was some speculation that could be accessed, you know, at some point through HI, and everyone really, you know, stopped, right? I do think that when there is a sense that your communications can be brought up in open public forums, that does change what people do. People migrate to other forms of communication. Perhaps the phone call will come back into vogue.
What about the disappearing signal? 30 seconds disappearing message on Signal.
Or Signal. Yes. There you go.
That's where you're at.
But I mean, to me, like, it wasn't seeing those texts like that. There wasn't anything problematic there. Like, that is how close colleagues talk to each other. I actually thought it was really insightful to see.
Jordan, they shouldn't be accessible. Let me say that to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They shouldn't be accessible. They're a modern form conversation, which would not have been accessible and which was not contemplated as being accessible under the Act. The two people talking to each other would be accessible information. And now it is, just because we've changed the way we communicate.
Well, I don't think maybe so, but I think that the reality is that once you write this shit down, it's accessible. That's it. Like, and I think that everyone has to now have that expectation.
Sure.
You know what though? It won't change it. I'll tell you that I've thought about this, and my buddy Mark Mendelson, you know, David, former homicide detective. We've had this conversation because he used to be in investigations where they had wiretaps. And he would say cops would be sitting around in a van listening at 9 o'clock in the morning. And the bad guys would pick the phone up and go, "Hello, you motherfuckers. We know you're listening. I hope you all choke and die." Then they put the phone down. 4 hours later, they'd be on the phone talking to people and absolutely incriminating themselves. It's human nature. You can't resist. Like, I just think they can put out an edict and say, be conscious. Make sure you're careful about this stuff. But human nature is you're going to shoot the shit. And so I thank God. Just thank God. Thank God. I mean, if that test had been around in my time, I would have failed so miserably. It wouldn't have been joking about people. It wouldn't have been saying something mean about the Premier of Ontario. It would have been a profanity-laced personal judgment of everyone around me, friend, foe, and stranger alike. I would have been incinerated.
Yeah,
I remember when Webster left his BlackBerry at a bar in the market, and I just shat myself. Like, I just couldn't believe what would happen if that was found. All right, let's move on to provincial budgets. And boy, there's money flying out everywhere from every government now for inflation relief. One form or another. Doesn't matter what your political label is. Doesn't matter really what your fiscal shape is. You are finding some way to get some money out the door. That's obviously good politics, and we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the fact that at the same time as they are doing this, they are trying to make a public case that the problems in the healthcare system, which are, along with inflation, dominating the public mindset about public policy right now. Two things, one of which is, how can I afford my life? Second of all, Jesus, if somebody in my family gets sick, what's going to happen? So the provinces are trying to make the case that the healthcare system's in the shape that it's in because they can't get any money out of the feds and they're tapped out to fix it themselves. Then they turn around and they have money for everybody. How does that play? Are they sabotaging themselves here, or are people not going to look at it the way I've just described it, Jordan?
Well, I mean, I think there's certainly a danger that some people will look at it the way you've described it, and that's exactly why Ford has socked away surplus and reserves to basically to prevent that situation. I was struck by the way the differences between how the provinces are dealing with this. So you've got what Ford is doing, and then you go over to BC where they've got about a $10 billion surplus, and they're shoveling half of that out the door right away in terms of immediate assistance for people on cost of living stuff. So I think, everybody's making a play based on what they believe their own best politics is, and time will tell whether how
Danielle
that flows.
Smith, $2.5 billion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, BC, it's like I think 5.5 is going out on the announcements in the last week alone. So this is big money that's moving. Now, of course, on the healthcare issue, this is a long-term problem. So I'm not sure that 1 year where the provinces did a little bit better than they expected to do negates the conversation with the feds about what the overall balance of funding is. I think that they can still go to that. But I do think that in Ontario, as people are going to be struggling more and more with problems in the health system and with affordability stuff, it's going to become a little bit of a problem for the premier to have that money socked away instead of putting it to bear on some of these problems.
Kory?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is the same situation in each province. Well, I'm sure it isn't from just a reality standpoint. Alberta is awash in money right now because of energy prices, and I forget what the exact ratio is, but it's something like $1 for every dollar a barrel on crude. It's like $100 million in government revenue. They
shouldn't sock that away because everybody knows that will go on forever.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But they're not. They're spending in relative terms to their surplus a very modest amount of money. It's just that the surplus is spiked up because of energy prices in a way that is very different than the situation in Ontario, with a much, much larger population and a surplus that's $2.5 billion or whatever. It's like a small fraction. Like the total surplus in Ontario is less than what these guys blew out the door on these one-time measures. So it depends what province you're in, but irrespective, I think it's safe to assume that these surpluses are going to be gone by next year. Every province is predicting they'll be gone next year. And I don't think, by touching the side of their nose while they're saying it. I think the expectation is we're going to be in a recession. The government revenues are going to go way down, that we're going to see expenditures continue to have tons, a lot of pressure on them for healthcare and many other reasons. So, I think this is all the things the provinces have been saying around healthcare funding were true before this, and they'll be true after this. And there isn't some, magical new paradigm that we've shifted into where provinces are now awash in money, and that's going to be the case, even in the short term. These were
sure muddies the comms, though. It sure muddies the comms.
Maybe a little bit, but yeah, maybe a little bit. But Ottawa has more money too, and the relative ratios in terms of spending on healthcare have not changed. So what's true for one is true for the other. So the provinces can't claim poverty, I guess, but nor can the federal government. So it just brings you back to the same question: should a 50-50 FedProv program, or what was started as a 50-50 FedProv program, be a 21.79% program or not? What is the appropriate balance? And I think on that, the provinces are in a very strong position comms-wise. And I think they have been for a long time. And I think further buttressed by the fact that it's premiers of every political persuasion saying the exact same thing, irrespective of who's in charge in Ottawa, lends a certain air of credibility to the conversation.
I don't know, Scott. It feels to me like they can still persuade people that the federal government's part of the problem and needs to come to the table, but it's going to be difficult for them to convince people that they were doing everything they could to get the healthcare system through this period of time.
Yeah, I think it buys the federal government a little room and a little time to maneuver if it wishes that. I'm not sure it should want that. I'll come back to that in a second. But I was really struck, though, by the contrast between, I'll just take as an example, I'll take two provinces, Alberta and Ontario. Now, there's a huge difference in those two. Danielle Smith is going to face the electorate in relatively short order, and Doug Ford isn't. So she's got to push money out the door to deal with the problem that is now. She doesn't have the luxury of sort of being clever and thinking about how things unfold over a handful of years. She's got to get some relief measures out the door, and they've got to be persuasive. But the contrast between the two of them, I think, is that Ford's government very clearly worked hard to produce a deficit. It did a ton of reserves. Money's tucked away all over the place. The operating budgets for a lot of places have money stuck into the fiscal framework. I'm going to bet $1 squillion that a bunch of those budgets won't be spent to the tune of 100 cents on the dollar. That'll give them windfall numbers next year. So I'm not sure that I think that this problem, so to speak, this problem of surpluses dissipates. But they worked hard between the measures they introduced on cost of living relief and the surplus dollars they socked away in A-base assignments and reserves. They worked hard to produce a deficit so that they could strengthen their ability to have this clarity in terms of this argument. I really, truly believe that. And I think that that was shrewd politically. Danielle Smith did not do that. She had too much money to sock away to start with, and she has the electorate to face in the immediate term. But I think that contrast is interesting, and I think it's worth noting. Ultimately, this is kind of a trap for the feds, right? Because I think it buys you time to maneuver if you're the feds, but this freight train is coming down the track. And if you think, well, this allows me, I can just sort of say, I can make the cerebral argument that, this province and that province has enough operating funds that they could have made different choices, or they could raise taxes that they wish to, all this stuff. All those arguments are self-defeating because you can't be heard by the general public as saying that you're not going to actually try to do something about fixing the problem. And that is the fundamental, implacable problem that all governments face. And that's why the provinces will eventually win this argument. I think the question for the feds is, when do you want to bring this argument to heel? When do you want to have this discussion about fiscal relations across the federation? Do you want to have it now, or do you want to have it closer to the next election? And I personally continue to believe you want to have it sooner rather than later. As unpleasant as it's going to be, I'd rather get that thing confronted when I've got the NDP strongly at my side, when I think I can try to get past this, I want to get past this big fiscal fight, and I want to get past the recession if I can before I face voters in, 2 years, 3 years, whatever.
It's not the issue you want in a campaign, Scott?
No, I don't think I do.
You don't want to run against the provinces.
Well, listen, you can make an argument for that, and that's an interesting dialogue for us to have. You can sit in a laboratory and construct an argument as to why that might be in your interest. My guess is that if you're having a fight with the provinces about healthcare, you're probably going to lose as a federal government, because ultimately most of your arguments are about, I could spend more, but I don't want to. And I just don't know that that's going to. You
could have come to the table with a huge whack of money, but asked for some conditions that they won't agree to.
Yeah.
Well, or you could get a deal and do it closer to the election, and then say, well, if you don't reelect the federal Liberal government, this money is going to go away and the deal will be gone. I think that would be a more traditional Liberal play, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't do that. I think that you don't want to hold ransom something that people feel that fundamental about. I think that's risky.
Plus, the Conservatives will fucking lie and say they'll keep it in place,
right?
Like they did with Kelowna.
Plus, I don't think that there's any real reward on a deal like this, for the feds. This is something that pays dividends at the provincial level if you can be seen to sort it out, but it's just like a basic bar to get over for voters at the federal level.
Oh, but there is a win to be seen, Jordan. There is a win to be seen as the people who care most about it in the country.
But I'm not sure that even if they pony up a ton of money, I don't think anyone's going to believe that the federal government cares the most about it.
Liberals have a ton of credibility on this question.
Yeah, I think they, I would want to be talking about healthcare in any way, shape, or form if I were the Liberals in the next election. I would choose that over any other issue on the field. No,
well, let's look at it this way: they need a fight, Kory. They need a fight with somebody in the next election, or it's just a referendum on them.
Yeah, well,
after 10 years, they've got to be creating a choice.
Right. And if there's going to be an issue that we're talking about right now, it's going to be the economy. It's going to be inflation. It's going to be interest rates. It's going to be housing prices. Which one of those topics would you want instead of healthcare if you're the Liberals? Every one of those other topics is a winner for Poilievre in comparison to healthcare. Anything you can do to talk about healthcare if you're the Liberal government, I think is a day that you're feeling good about.
As long as you're carrying a message that firmly places you in the position to be the defender of healthcare. And I think that can be complicated.
It's either a sword or a shield, right?
Well, you guys wake up in the morning in the Liberal Party and you're the defenders of healthcare, and we could spend any amount of money in the Conservative Party and we're still a threat. So it's a fact-free zone, unfortunately.
I would agree with that.
I'm scared of it.
Much like this podcast. We're a fact-free zone.
I will, but my last comment on provincial government spending, by the way, is I am amazed to see the difference in the way things are judged, because when Freeland was coming up with her financial statement and there was talk about what she was going to do for inflation relief for people, a ton of the media coverage of this was about, well, is she going to stoke inflation with what she's spending? And is she going to exacerbate the problem with her relief? And then after she announced her very limited package, there was a lot of analysis about, well, was it inflationary and was it not inflationary? I don't even see that being considered in these provincial expenditures. Like, I don't even see anybody even asking the question, is it stoke inflation to throw $2.5 billion into the Alberta economy? I assume it does. If Poilievre's right the first time, he's got to be right this time.
Yeah, of course. Like, I think all of this stuff is inflationary. And I think, other concerns around public sector wage increasing too quickly. Like, these are the things that
Gun control. Don't forget, you think gun control is inflationary, and the Liberals ought to get off that, right, Kory?
Well, it is in my household.
You fucker. You always go to the same well.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, look at Larry Summers. Like, it's not like it's just, Fraser Institute folks that are speaking about this. The loudest voice in U.S. Public policy realms around inflation stuff and these government spending initiatives is the guy who was the economic advisor to Obama and played a huge role.
And perhaps relevantly wanted to be to Biden and wasn't chosen.
Yeah, I think I don't buy that. Like, a lot of what's going out the door as well, if you look at BC and you look federally, is quite targeted. It's the lowest income folks. This is, I don't think that is at all in the same category as the spending that we saw during the pandemic in terms of inflationary effects. And, as to wages, overall wages are still growing far more slowly than inflation, about 3% versus 9% earlier in the year. So that is a different kettle of fish.
We will come back to the Bank of Canada and inflation. And by the way, I'm going to have a hurly-burly with some union leaders. We'll be talking about wages and the Bank of Canada as well on that. So
there will be feelings.
There will be feelings. More to come on that. But it's time for Gordon Pinsent and our Hey Yous. Gordon?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's up?
I'll go first this week. I want to go first.
Yeah.
Look, this past week of the inquiry gave us many important moments. It gave us many reflective moments. It gave us many dramatic moments. But the runaway winner for providing us with entertaining moments goes to my Hey You nominee, Brendan Miller, the convoy lawyer. This guy was an all-star rodeo clown all week long. This is the kind of guy who likes to use the middle urinal. He might not have a lot to show, but he wants to talk to everybody. And I'm telling you, the whole week, from, accusing this fellow at Enterprise of being a liberal stooge who was flying a Nazi flag, and then he's getting sued, to, bumbling around in his cross, to chasing Greg McEachran down a hallway and getting called an idiot. All of it dramatically ending in the astonishing hook he gets. Like, when the crazies say, I'm sorry, we've sat down and thought about it, and your conduct has been so unbelievably incompetent that we're going to hook you from the dramatic moment. Finally, you get your mitts on Justin Trudeau. Nope, sorry, we're relieving you of that moment. My God, what a humbling. My God, what an embarrassment. I don't know what he does for the rest of his life, but good Lord, what a gruesome week. There were a few people who had a bad week last week. Nobody had a worse week than Brendan Miller. That's who my Hey You goes out to. And I just say, sir, I, as someone who opposes almost everything you believe in, am a gigantic fan, and thank you.
Scott, that's the best week of his life by far.
Oh, yeah. Well, Scott, thanks a lot for that, because like that was totally going to be my hey you, and so now I've been totally big-footed. So
That's why I jumped in first. I knew. I just knew. I thought we'd all would pick him.
That was catty, Scott.
Yeah, no, that was that. But that's my hey you as well. But I just got to ask the question. You know how some people say, dogs look like their owners sometimes, or is it the other way around? Is it possible that lawyers can look like their clients? Like that there's some sort of, where you can be kind of an oafish, conspiracy theorist of limited competency and poor communication skills, and that's because your clients like that. I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of affinity here that's worth having the Law Society study and figure out. But yeah, that was the most fun part of the Convoy Emergency Act inquiry to date so far. I hope that the folks at Enterprise Canada find a lawyer like them that's very competent and highly skilled, and they sue this guy into oblivion, because he's certainly committed to some pretty egregious defamation.
Well, judging by the different reactions we get from women in the park, I don't think my dog Ryder and I look anything alike. Jordan, you got to hey you.
I do. On the other side of the legal representation coin, I'd like to send out a hey you to Paul Champ and Associates. So these fine folks represented the city of Ottawa with great competence.
Although he's from Regina, I think.
He is.
I think he's from Regina.
Yeah. So shout out going to Paul Champ, Emily Tamang, Christine Johnson, and Bijan Roy. Thank you for surfing the waves of the crazy very competently and delivering great representation to the folks who lived through this shit show.
Excellent. All right. My hey you goes out to Katie Telford, Brian Clow, and John Broadhead, the three members of the Prime Minister's office who, in extraordinary experience, appeared before this committee, were questioned by all the lawyers to their heart's content. They were there for hours. They had to prepare a ton of ministers and the Prime Minister for their appearances that week, in addition to getting ready themselves. And they were untouched, as near as I can tell. I didn't read an article the next day about anything that they had said. I didn't see a hanging thread the Prime Minister needed to clean up in his testimony. Those people went into the bear pit and handled themselves incredibly professionally, and made the case that this had been part of a very reasonable process. Extraordinarily well done for the staff, and in a very tough situation. And that's my hey you.
100%. And can I add something, David, to your point earlier about these texts ought not to be accessible? I think there's also a legitimate discussion to be had about this encroachment, parliamentary committees, inquiries, calling staff. Maybe it's going to sound super self-interested to people, but I don't know why senior staff, when there are responsible ministers available, have to be put in a position of testifying. I just find that it's. I don't know that that's right.
I'll meet you and raise you on that. That I actually think it's an absolute violation of what our system of government is designed to do, and that we need to go back more towards ministerial accountability and less about the folks who are underneath. And I say that in all earnestness as somebody who's normally a staff member, and if there is a fuck up, I do not want to be held responsible. I want my boss, the minister, the first minister, to be there. So, and as all staffers on this podcast, I think we should all get behind that very hard.
Heartily agree.
Yeah, I was before a parliamentary committee once, and it was not pretty. Let's just say that. All right, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and Jordan and Scott and Kory for being here with us this week. And everybody out there who is watching or listening to the show, thank you for doing that. And we'll be back next week with more Cursive Politics.